You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Andrew Lawton Show. Midweek edition here. It is Wednesday, and we are going to put the "we" in Wednesday. I've been waiting since Monday to use that joke, and I finally get to now. You know, Justin Trudeau put out his daily itinerary for Wednesday, and it was private meetings. So no public itinerary, no public announcements, no press conferences, no media avail. And all I could think of is, you know, how it looked like the "we," the W and the E were capitalized in Wednesday, but I digress. I'm going like full QAnon conspiracy theory on this. In any case, the scandal is continuing to balloon, and this is a big problem right now. We know that Justin Trudeau was giving a multi-million-dollar contract, almost worth $1 billion of government money, under the control of a charity that has been paying his buddies and his family members and all that stuff. And then Justin Trudeau finally apologized. Now, this comes after being rather unrepentant last week. He said he made a mistake, he did the wrong thing, he should have recused himself from the discussions. This is what he said on Monday.
This morning, I know people want to hear more about the Canada Student Service Grant Program in particular. I know there are many questions and problems with the way this program is run about, and I know people have concerns about it. I get that. I made a mistake in not recusing myself immediately from the discussions, given our family's history. And I'm sincerely sorry about not having done that.
Now, there are two options here. It's either better late than never or too little too late. And I'm going to probably side with too little too late because of how Justin Trudeau and the Prime Minister's office were talking about this last week by saying, listen, it's only about serving children. It's not about who benefited. They had an option to clean this up weeks ago. They had an option to clean it up last week, and they didn't. So I don't think we can really give them too much credit for doing the right thing if it's coming after attempting to deflect and muddle and muddy the discussion for several days. That's my take on this. And now we have the another development of this in the National Post, that it was the Trudeau government itself that organized and contributed over $1 million to a We Day event in 2017, during which the Post says, we likely gave some of that money to Margaret Trudeau to speak. Now, I don't think this is that, this was orchestrated by the PMO. I don't think it's that, they said, all right, we're going to invite you guys to Ottawa, we're going to pay you, but you have to invite my mom to speak. That's the rule. No, but I think it shows the deep and intricately linked ties that exist between we and the government, the long-standing ties, financial and familial, and it really reinforces the question of why on earth did Trudeau think that it was his right to not recuse himself from this discussion? Why did Bill Morneau not think that as well? And by the way, Seamus O'Regan and Katie Telford, also two very high-ranking Liberals, one in cabinet, one in the PMO, also have fundraised hundreds of thousands of dollars for We. We found this out last week as well. So all of this is coming to a head right now, and as a tax-paying Canadian, I think most people are looking at this and saying, like, what? You could not get away with this in any other sector. You could not get away with it in any other space, but this is what passes for integrity in Justin Trudeau's government. And look, Mary Dawson, who's the former ethics commissioner, says she's fairly certain that he's going to have been found to have contravened the rules. But I would look at, again, Mary Dawson's thing and say, look, she may be right, but this reinforces why it is so dangerous right now that we have an ethics regime that has absolutely no teeth. It'll cost him $500. He can cover it by doing just a 5-minute speech for We, and that will be enough. And that makes it go away. There's no real remedy that the ethics commissioner can force, and more importantly, there's no real punishment for breaking the rules, even if you are, as Justin Trudeau is when it comes to federal ethics rules, a repeat offender. So the Conservatives on the Finance Committee are calling Justin Trudeau to the committee to testify. This is what the Conservatives are trying to seek here. Pierre Poilievre is the Conservative finance critic and a member of Parliament. He joins us on the line now. Pierre, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Good to be with you.
So let's talk about I mean, there are a lot of aspects to this. I mean, I made a comment on the show the other day that I think we should be getting a bulk discount on ethics investigations, but we're talking about a situation here that I think is continuously rearing its head, which is just a fundamental disrespect for the federal ethics laws and just, I'd say, for political integrity in general.
I agree with you. I think the problem we have here is that the Prime Minister thinks he's a king. He has been told his whole life that he's a prince. And princes and kings often don't think that the rules of the realm apply to them. So he would probably subconsciously anyway say, yes, normally it would be unethical for a prime minister to direct $1 billion sole source contract to a group that had paid his family $300,000. But I'm no mere mortal. I'm not a normal prime minister. I'm a prince and a king, and I can do whatever I want. I think that is the prime minister's personal sentiment. I think that's how he views the world. And the media, the mainstream media on Parliament Hill, not the media out in the real world, but those around him in the precinct, reinforced that notion. And they were doing everything they could during the pandemic to treat him as though he was a king who would come out of his castle and grace us all with his presence daily, giving declarations and edicts for us all to follow. And that even questioning his conduct was completely, almost treasonous. And I think through that experience, he started to think that he could just do anything he wanted, and he did.
And when you mention questioning, the Conservatives have now tried to get him before the Finance Committee to answer questions. I mean, there are two aspects of this. Number one, how likely do you think it is that that'll happen? And number two, what is it that you can really get out of this? I mean, it does seem plain as day what happened. What more is there that you think we need to learn?
Well, we want to know where this idea came from. I mean, he continually claims that the public service concocted this scheme. Andrew, I used to be the minister responsible for employment and training, and I can tell you there's no way the bureaucracy in that department would have concocted this idea. It just doesn't make any sense, especially given that the purported purpose of the program is to pay young people to help charities and non-for-profits. But there's already a program that does that. It's called the Canada Summer Jobs Program. In fact, the amounts that they subsidize hourly wages is similar to what Trudeau proposes with this new scheme. So in other words, it's basically a duplication of something already done within the public service. I would be stunned if public servants, knowing that, and they do, would have recommended farming the program out that they already run inside. And so I believe that we need to find out where this idea originated. And I suspect that what we will find as we follow the breadcrumbs is that it was the team Trudeau, the elites around him, and those who stood to profit from this transaction who concocted it rather than public servants.
You mentioned something interesting there about the pre-existing program. If you were to take out the Trudeau-we connections and all of the connections between Bill Morneau and we and Seamus O'Regan and we and take out all of those things, does it seem like it was just a bad program in general? I mean, or something that was unnecessary, even if you take out the conflicts of interest?
Oh, absolutely. It's a ridiculous concept. I mean, Orwell warns us that whenever governments abuse language, they're probably abusing other things at the same time. And to start with, he calls it a paid volunteer program. Well, that's impossible. I mean, you can either be paid or you can volunteer, but you can't be paid to volunteer. If you're paid, then you're not, by definition, a volunteer.
Then it's a summer job, a la Canada Summer Jobs Program.
Exactly. It's a summer job. Now, they needed to invent a new name, though, in order to justify a new program. And that was the only reason why this program, why this name was created. They would have loved to just say it's a summer job program, but if they did that, then they wouldn't have been able to justify creating a separate $1 billion sole source contract. Everyone would have said, well, why wouldn't you just use the program that already goes by that name? So whenever you see language that is abused, you'll see other abuses. The other thing, Andrew, I would point out is that so often with these scandals, they result from governments doing things that they have no business doing in the first place, right? Like the sponsorship program. Was it really justified for any government to be putting advertorials and advertisements up at these events all over a particular province? No, not really. That's not the role of government. $1 billion gun registry. Well, I mean, even if it had cost $1, it was something the government should not have been doing. And here again, we have government interfering with the charitable sector to effectively corrupt the very meaning of a benevolent word like volunteer. Again, not the role of government. And so whenever governments venture outside of their core purpose, they tend to attract corruption. Or perhaps it's the other way around. Perhaps corruption attracts government outside of its core mandate.
Yeah, that's a really great point on this. And I'm all for finding ways that we can, perhaps download the bureaucracy's responsibilities and find private sector delivery of services. But that doesn't seem at all like what this was. This was really just expanding the bureaucracy to a group that wouldn't even have the accountability.
You're absolutely right. And this is something we always have to watch out for. This happens again and again. We as conservatives, we say, look, let's remove government and allow either the private sector or the societal sectors like charity and philanthropy to replace it. And then but we have to be careful that we don't get the opposite of what we are looking for, right? So instead of, in this case, instead of vacating the space, the government vacating the space so that the volunteer and charitable sector could fill it, they try to nationalize the volunteer and charitable sector and extend, and instead of expanding the role of society and shrinking the role of government, they did exactly the opposite. And we see this, for example, with the infrastructure bank. I mean, we all like to see more private sector investment in infrastructure. But with the infrastructure bank, what they're doing is the opposite. They're taking things that are already privately financed and nationalizing the risk. So we have to be very careful to watch the real meaning of words and actions to determine if government is in fact just grabbing more power and controlling more and more of our lives.
I mentioned earlier on in the show, one of the big problems is that our ethics infrastructure that we have for investigating and pursuing these doesn't really have any teeth. And we know this because Justin Trudeau has been found to have violated this multiple times and other parts of his government as well. What do you think needs to be done to reform the ethics and conflict of interest process so that there's actually some heft behind it when they go after lawmakers that have broken the rules?
Well, listen, I don't know that I think that the problem with the previous violations is that the police didn't do their job. And we have law enforcement to apply the criminal code. In the case of the Aga Khan Island, the police simply just didn't do their job. There are provisions in the criminal code that ban government officials from accepting benefits from entities that are seeking assistance from government. And so in the case of the Aga Khan Billionaire Island vacation, Trudeau took $200,000 of vacations from someone asking him personally for a $15 million grant. That's a criminal code violation. The RCMP doesn't disagree with me on that, by the way. We wrote them. They wrote back and they didn't say, no, he didn't break the law or we found exculpatory evidence. They said, no, we can't productively pursue an investigation. Those are the words that the letter said. So what the hell does that mean? You can't productively pursue an investigation. Were you stopped? Did someone in the government block you from doing your job? So in other words, the RCMP did not do its job. And frankly, if the Mounties felt they were implicated in that scandal, they should have just referred it to a different police force to do an independent criminal investigation. And I think maybe that's what the Mounties are going to have to do in this case, just simply say we're too close to the Prime Minister. The cabinet appoints the RCMP commissioner. Maybe the Mounties ought to simply redirect the complaint to the OPP, the QPP, the Ottawa Police Service, or some other police entity that is not compromised by prime ministerial power.
So do you think the police should be involved in this situation as well then, just to be absolutely clear?
I do. I'm not saying, I haven't concluded that there was a criminal code breach. I'm neither a police officer nor a judge. So I don't have we don't have all the facts yet. But I certainly think that the police should examine whether or not there was a breach of trust, whether or not the Prime Minister considered the payment to his family to be an inducement, that motivated him to create this extremely unusual contract. And so there should be a high-level inspector or investigator with a police force go in, establish all of the facts, and determine whether or not the criminal code applies.
Just turning before we wrap things up, Pierre, to the broader financial state of Canada right now. We found out last week a deficit over $340 billion. I know that a lot of that was inevitable, just given government forcing people to shut down their businesses, so you have to have a bit of relief there. How much of that do you think was avoidable, though? I mean, I know that you've been critical, as has the leader of the Conservatives right now, Andrew Scheer, about a lot of the programs and how they were delivered. Do you think that we could have had an even smaller deficit?
Oh, there's no doubt. We should have gone into this with a balanced budget. From 2016 until 2019, the world economy was hot. And for some of that time, not all of it, some of that time, commodity prices were high. And the U.S. economy, which we have the privilege of neighboring, was on fire. And therefore, we had all the winds blowing at our backs. And there's no reason we ought not to have balanced the budget in that time period. If we had, then the balance going in would have been strong, the deficit would have been smaller, and the debt load we carried, total debt load, would have been about $80 or $90 billion smaller than it is right now. The other thing I would point out is that the programs that are designed to respond to COVID have serious anti-growth, anti-work attributes. Like if you're on this CERB program, you go back and earn more than $1,000, they kick you from the CERB to the curb. So a lot of workers are saying that they can't go back to work and they can't earn money for 16 weeks. We should remove that anti-work penalty, let people earn more than $1,000 and let them phase out their CERB as they earn more with their jobs. Same with the rent and wage subsidies. Both of them require businesses keep their revenues down 30 or in some cases 70% below pre-COVID levels. So that requires businesses to artificially suppress revenues in order to get government support. They should remove that and make those scalable programs so businesses are always better off with an extra sale or an extra dollar of revenue. Those kinds of pro-growth policies would allow businesses and workers to recover. It would reduce dependence on government and increase the taxes that businesses and workers pay under the existing rates. So we need a pro-growth agenda now. The government and the Bank of Canada cannot simply pay the wages of the nation forever.
And I guess that just in closing, we know there's a Conservative leadership race on right now. The election could be theoretically at any point in the next couple of years. What do you think the Conservatives moving forward need to do, either in running for an election or even if they form government, to get the books in check? I mean, because obviously you have to close that deficit somehow. You don't want to raise revenues by increasing taxes, and certainly cutting spending is going to be something that will unleash the massive criticism that Conservatives are so accustomed to. What's the answer there?
Well, I think we need a pro-growth free market agenda that will unleash the economy. We have, trillions of dollars of natural resources locked beneath the ground because of anti-development legislation like C-69, C-48. We have a tax system that punishes work and business earnings. We have some of the slowest approvals for normal economic activity. It takes almost 3 times longer to get a warehouse approved for construction in Canada as it does in the United States, just as one example. We need to remove all of those obstacles to unleash the full power of free enterprise. That will generate the wealth necessary to phase out our deficit over time and make our enable our people to carry the enormous debt load that governments have thrust upon them.
Conservative finance critic Pierre Poilievre joining me on the line. Pierre, thanks so much for coming on today. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, great to be with you, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.